I grew up wearing my brother's hand-me-downs, always second best in my own family's eyes. Now I own a stunning beach house in Florida that I bought with my own hard-earned money. But when my father casually announced it was perfect for your brother and his family's summer getaways, something inside me snapped. After decades of being overlooked and undervalued, I finally realized it was time to stop letting anyone take what was rightfully mine. This was the moment everything changed. My name is Emily Harper, and I learned what inequality felt like before I could even tie my own shoes. Growing up in Tallahassee, Florida, I lived in the shadow of my older brother Brandon from the moment I drew my first breath. In my father George's eyes, Brandon was the golden child, the heir apparent who could do no wrong. I was just the afterthought, the spare part that came along 3 years later. Every birthday told the story of our family's twisted priorities. Brandon's celebrations were elaborate affairs with rented bounce houses, dozens of neighborhood kids, and professionally decorated cakes from the best bakery in town. Dad would beam with pride, telling anyone who'd listen about his champion son while handing out party favors that cost more than most families spent on groceries. My birthdays, Mom would quietly mix box cake batter in our cramped kitchen at 11:30 at night, decorating it herself with store-bought frosting and crooked lettering. "It's made with love, sweetheart," she'd whisper, her voice heavy with the apology she could never quite voice. The guest list rarely extended beyond immediate family, and the presents were practical things I needed anyway, school supplies disguised as gifts, hand-me-down clothes from Brandon's closet. The clothes were perhaps the cruelest reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. While Brandon strutted around in fresh Nike sneakers and name-brand jeans, I shuffled through middle school wearing his outgrown shirts with stretched collars and faded sports logos. When other kids asked why I dressed like a boy, I learned to laugh it off. "Vintage is in," I'd say, while dying inside. Dad's justification was always the same. "We don't need to spend as much on her. Linda, girls don't need all that fancy stuff, she'll just get married and leave anyway." He'd say this right in front of me, as if I were furniture that couldn't hear or feel. Mom would wince and busy herself with dishes or laundry, never quite finding the courage to challenge him directly. The disparity wasn't just about material things. When Brandon showed even mild interest in soccer, Dad immediately signed him up for the most expensive travel league in the county. Equipment, training camps, tournament fees, nothing was too costly for his precious son's potential. When I brought home straight A's and asked to join the debate team, Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's nice, honey. Just don't expect me to drive you around to a bunch of pointless meetings." I remember one particularly crushing evening when I was 12. I'd won second place in the county science fair with a project about water conservation that I'd worked on for months. I burst through the front door, trophy in hand, eager to share my achievement. Dad was in his recliner, analyzing Brandon's baseball stats from Little League. "So look what I won," I announced, holding up the silver trophy that caught the lamplight. Dad glanced over for maybe 2 seconds. "That's good, sweetheart. Brandon, your batting average is really improving. I think we should look into private coaching." That night, I lay in bed staring at my trophy on the nightstand, feeling smaller than I ever had before. Mom crept in around midnight and sat on the edge of my bed. "I'm proud of you, Em," she whispered, stroking my hair. "That project was brilliant." "Then why doesn't Dad care?" I asked, my voice cracking. Mom was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. "Finally," she said, "some people show love differently. Your father, he has old-fashioned ideas about what matters." Even at 12, I knew that was just another way of saying Dad didn't think I mattered at all. The pattern continued relentlessly. Brandon got a brand new bicycle for Christmas while I received his old one, hastily spray-painted pink. He got music lessons when he showed interest in guitar. I was told to find free tutorials online when I wanted to learn piano. When he crashed his bicycle and scraped his knee, Dad rushed him to urgent care for stitches that probably weren't necessary. When I fell off my skateboard and genuinely needed medical attention for a sprained wrist, I was told to walk it off and given an ice pack. By the time I turned 15, something fundamental had shifted inside me. The hurt was still there. It would always be there, but it had crystallized into something harder, more useful: determination. I stopped waiting for my father's approval and started planning my escape from this suffocating hierarchy. Late at night, while Brandon played video games downstairs with Dad cheering him on, I'd sit at my desk under the harsh fluorescent light, calculating. How much would college cost? How much could I save from babysitting? What scholarships were available? I filled notebook after notebook with plans, budgets, and backup strategies. I was going to prove them all wrong. Not for their approval I'd given up on that fantasy, but for myself. I would build something they couldn't ignore, couldn't diminish, and most importantly, couldn't take away from me. I just had no idea how brutally they'd test that resolve when I finally succeeded. High school crystallized everything I'd suspected about my place in the Harper family hierarchy. While I was grinding through advanced placement courses and building an impressive academic record, Brandon was coasting through his classes with C's and D's, his real focus entirely on the baseball diamond. Every Friday night, Dad would be in the bleachers screaming Brandon's name, wearing a custom jersey with Harper's dad emblazoned across the back. He'd bought a professional-grade camera just to document every swing, every catch, every moment of his son's athletic glory. Meanwhile, I was winning academic competitions, making honor roll semester after semester, and Dad couldn't even be bothered to attend the awards ceremonies. "You don't need me there," he'd say dismissively when I'd mention the Honor Society induction or the state-level math competition finals. "You're smart enough to handle it yourself. Besides, Brandon has a crucial game that night." The contrast became most painfully obvious during our respective 16th birthdays. Brandon's Sweet 16 was a spectacle that had the neighbors talking for months. Dad rented out the community center, hired a DJ, and invited what felt like half the school. The centerpiece of the celebration was a gleaming red Honda Civic sitting in our driveway with a massive bow on top. "Every young man needs reliable transportation," Dad announced proudly, tossing Brandon the keys while everyone cheered. "Can't have my boy walking to practice like some common kid." When my 16th birthday rolled around 3 months later, I received a laminated bus pass and a cake from the grocery store clearance rack. "Public transportation builds character," Dad explained matter-of-factly. "Besides, you're not driving to sports practice every day. The bus will get you where you need to go." I smiled and thanked him, swallowing the humiliation like bitter medicine. But that night, I lay awake calculating. The car cost at least $15,000, the insurance, gas, and maintenance would add up to thousands more each year. Money that apparently we had for Brandon but somehow couldn't spare for basic equality. The real gut punch came during my junior year when I accidentally overheard a conversation that changed everything. I'd stayed late at school for debate team practice and forgotten my textbook, so I crept back into the house around 10:30, hoping to grab it without disturbing anyone. Dad's study light was on, and I could hear him on the phone with my Uncle Rick. "I've got Brandon's college fund sitting pretty at $60,000, Dad was saying, his voice filled with paternal pride. "Full ride to state if his baseball keeps improving, but I want him to have options. Maybe look at some private schools with strong athletics programs." My heart stopped. $60,000. I knew Dad had been setting aside money for our education, but I'd assumed it was split evenly between us. Curiosity turned to dread as I pressed myself against the hallway wall, straining to hear more. "What about Emily's fund?" Uncle Rick asked. Dad's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Emily, hell, I've got maybe 12 grand set aside for her. Look, Rick, be realistic here. Brandon's going to carry on the Harper name, maybe go pro if we're lucky. He's going to need a solid foundation. Emily's bright enough to figure things out on her own. Besides, she'll probably just get married after college and have kids. Why throw money at something that won't pay dividends?" The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. 60,000 versus 12,000. 5-to-1 odds in favor of my brother, not because of merit or need, but simply because I'd been born female. In Dad's mind, I was a temporary investment at best. I stood in that hallway for nearly 20 minutes, tears streaming down my face, listening to him detail Brandon's bright future while dismissing mine as an afterthought. When I finally crept upstairs to my room, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The last vestiges of hope that Dad might someday see me as worthy evaporated completely. That night marked the birth of what I privately called my freedom fund. If Dad wasn't going to invest in my future, I'd damn well invest in it myself. I got a job at the local coffee shop the next week, lying about my age to work more hours. Every spare moment was dedicated to earning money babysitting on weekends, tutoring struggling classmates, even helping neighbors with yard work. While Brandon spent his evenings playing video games or hanging out with friends, I was hunched over textbooks, applying for every scholarship I could find: academic merit awards, essay contests, minority scholarships, obscure grants from organizations I'd never heard of. I applied to all of them with the desperation of someone drowning. Mom noticed the change but didn't quite understand it. "You're working yourself too hard, sweetheart," she'd say, finding me studying at 1 a.m. "You're only 16. You should be having fun." "Fun doesn't pay for college," I'd reply, not looking up from my SAT prep book. The scholarship applications became my obsession. I wrote essay after essay about overcoming adversity, about being a first-generation college student technically true, since neither parent had finished their degrees, about my dreams of financial independence. I poured my rage and determination into those essays, crafting narratives that were true even if they didn't tell the whole truth about my family situation. By senior year, my strategy was paying off. I'd been accepted to the University of Florida with a full academic scholarship that covered tuition, room, and board. When the acceptance letter arrived, I felt a surge of vindication so powerful it made me dizzy. Dad's reaction was predictably lukewarm. "That's great, honey. Very practical choice." Then he turned to Brandon, who was lounging on the couch. "Speaking of college, son, I got a call from that recruiter at Florida State. They want to discuss your options." I watched my brother, who had a 2.3 GPA and whose greatest academic achievement was passing sophomore English on the second try, nod lazily, while Dad beamed with pride. The irony was suffocating. I'd earned my way to the same state university system through pure merit, while Brandon was being courted despite his academic mediocrity, solely because he could hit a baseball. That summer before college, I worked double shifts at the coffee shop, saving every penny for the expenses my scholarship wouldn't cover: books, supplies, emergency funds. I wanted to be completely self-sufficient. Meanwhile, Dad was taking Brandon on shopping sprees for college essentials, dropping hundreds of dollars on furniture for his dorm room and a new laptop for his studies. When they asked what I needed for college, I smiled and said I had everything covered. It was technically true, but only because I'd spent 2 years preparing for their indifference. The night before I left for university, Mom came to my room with a small envelope. Inside was $300 in cash, her tip money from waitressing. I realized, "It's not much," she whispered, "but I wanted you to have something from me." I hugged her tightly, knowing this small gesture had probably taken her months to save. It was the first time anyone in my family had made a real sacrifice for my education. As I packed my car, a beat-up Honda I'd bought with my own money, I felt the weight of what I was leaving behind. Not just a house, but a hierarchy that had shaped every day of my life. I was finally free to prove my worth on my own terms. I just had no idea how hard they'd fight to reclaim me when I finally succeeded. University of Florida became my sanctuary and my proving ground. For the first time in my life, I was judged purely on merit, not on my gender or my position in some arbitrary family hierarchy. My full academic scholarship covered tuition, room, and board. But I quickly learned that covered didn't mean comfortable. There were dozens of hidden expenses that financial aid never mentioned: lab fees, parking permits, textbooks that cost more than I'd made in a week at the coffee shop. So I did what I'd always done: I worked. While my roommate spent her evenings at fraternity parties, I was pulling shifts at the campus library, earning $8.50 an hour, reshelving books and helping confused freshmen navigate the computer system. Friday nights found me tutoring struggling business students for $20 an hour. Sunday mornings, I cleaned offices in downtown Gainesville for a commercial cleaning service. I majored in finance with a minor in business administration, choosing courses with the cold calculation of someone planning a war. Every class was selected for its practical application to wealth building, corporate finance, investment analysis, real estate principles, tax law. I absorbed it all with the hunger of someone who'd spent 18 years watching money determine human worth. My academic performance was flawless, not because I was naturally brilliant, but because failure wasn't an option. I'd seen what happened to family disappointments. Brandon was floundering through his freshman year at Florida State, changing majors 3 times and maintaining a GPA that would have gotten my scholarship revoked instantly. Yet Dad continued to fund his adventures with endless optimism, writing check after check for new opportunities and fresh starts. Meanwhile, I was building something permanent. By sophomore year, I'd caught the attention of Professor Williams, who taught advanced portfolio management. He pulled me aside after class one day in October. "Harper, you've got the instincts for this field," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Have you considered an internship? I have connections at some top firms." That conversation led to my first real break. Professor Williams recommended me for a summer internship at Summit Capital, a mid-sized investment firm in Orlando. The position was unpaid, but I convinced them to let me work part-time during the school year for a small hourly wage. It meant driving 2 hours each way twice a week, but I'd have done it for free. That's where I met Rachel Donovan. Rachel was Summit Capital's director of acquisitions, a woman in her late 40s who'd clawed her way up from nothing in an industry that was still very much an old boys' club. She had steel gray hair that she wore in a sharp bob, piercing blue eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for being ruthlessly fair. She scared most of the other interns, but I recognized something familiar in her, the controlled intensity of someone who'd fought for every inch of respect they'd ever received. "You're different from the others," she told me during my 3rd week, after I'd spent my lunch break analyzing quarterly reports instead of gossiping with the other interns. "You work like someone who has something to prove." "Doesn't everyone?" I replied. She smiled the first time I'd seen her do so. "No, they don't. Most of these kids are here because Daddy made a phone call. They're playing at being professionals. You're actually becoming one." Rachel became more than a supervisor. She became my mentor and eventually the closest thing to a mother figure I'd ever had. She taught me to read market trends, to spot undervalued properties, to negotiate without showing weakness. More importantly, she taught me that financial independence wasn't just about money. It was about freedom from other people's limitations. "Never let anyone else control your options," she'd say during our weekly coffee meetings. "The moment you depend on someone else's generosity, you've given them power over your future." Under her guidance, I started making my first real investments. Nothing dramatic, small amounts in index funds. Careful picks in emerging markets. I was still washing dishes at 2 in the morning to pay for textbooks, but I was also slowly building a portfolio that would outlast any scholarship or family support. Back home, Brandon's college experience was unfolding very differently. His phone calls were masterpieces of creative excuse-making. Failed classes became professor bias. Academic probation became administrative mix-ups. And his eventual decision to drop out after sophomore year became a strategic pivot to pursue entrepreneurship. Dad bought every word of it. "Brandon's got vision," he'd tell anyone who'd listen. "College is for followers. Entrepreneurs forge their own path." The entrepreneurship began with a sports bar that Brandon convinced Dad to finance. 12 months and $40,000 later, it closed due to what Brandon called market forces beyond our control, but what everyone else recognized as poor management and zero business sense. Next came a video game lounge that lasted 8 months, followed by a food truck venture that ended when Brandon realized he'd have to wake up before dawn to prep for the morning rush. Each failure was met with the same response from Dad: more money, more excuses, more unwavering faith in his son's eventual success. The pattern was so predictable it would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating. Meanwhile, I was quietly excelling. Junior year. I made Dean's List both semesters while working 25 hours a week. Senior year. I was offered a full-time position at Summit Capital before I'd even graduated. My starting salary was more than Dad made at his middle management job, but when I called home to share the news, his response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice. Sweetheart, corporate work suits you very stable, very safe. Speaking of careers, Brandon just had a great idea for a craft brewery. The market's really taking off, and I think this could be the one." I graduated summa cum laude at 22 with zero debt, a job offer, and a $5,000 investment portfolio that I'd built from tip money and overtime wages. Brandon was 25, living in Dad's basement, and developing a business plan for his latest sure-thing venture. The contrast was stark, but I was done caring about family recognition. I had something far more valuable than my father's approval. I had independence. For the first time in my life, my success belonged entirely to me. What I didn't realize was that this independence would eventually become a threat they couldn't ignore. My career at Summit Capital took off like a rocket. Within 6 months of starting full-time, I'd closed 3 major deals that netted the firm substantial commissions. Rachel had been right about my instincts. I could spot undervalued properties and emerging market trends with an accuracy that impressed even the senior partners. "Shh, you're a natural at this," Rachel told me during my first performance review. "Most analysts take years to develop the kind of market intuition you showed up with." The truth was, I approached every investment decision with the methodical desperation of someone who'd grown up watching financial inequality destroy relationships. I studied market reports until 3 in the morning, analyzed comparable sales data with obsessive precision, and never made a move without having 3 backup strategies. While my colleagues treated real estate investment like an intellectual exercise, I treated it like survival. By my second year, I was handling million-dollar portfolios and earning bonuses that dwarfed my childhood allowance dreams. But more importantly, I was learning the real secret of wealth-building leverage, not just financial leverage, but the leverage of knowledge, timing, and calculated risk. Rachel taught me to think beyond just earning money. "Rich people don't work for money," she'd explain over our Thursday lunch meetings. "They make money work for them. You need to start building passive income streams, not just collecting paychecks." Taking her advice to heart, I began my own real estate investments. My first purchase was a modest duplex in a transitioning neighborhood near the University of Florida. The numbers were perfect. I could live in one unit and rent out the other, essentially living for free while building equity. I scraped together the down payment from my savings and bonus money, moving back to Gainesville on weekends to manage the property myself. The duplex was just the beginning. Within 18 months, I'd acquired 2 more rental properties, each one carefully selected for its potential rather than its current condition. I spent my weekends painting walls, fixing leaky faucets, and learning basic electrical work from YouTube videos. Every dollar saved on contractors was another dollar toward the next investment. My portfolio strategy was aggressive but disciplined. I focused on properties near universities and growing business districts, places where rental demand was stable and property values had room to appreciate. While other young professionals were spending their bonuses on luxury cars and expensive vacations, I was buying buildings. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was becoming everything Dad had claimed Brandon would be: a successful entrepreneur building generational wealth, while Brandon himself continued his spectacular parade of failures. His craft brewery idea had lasted exactly 14 months before closing due to what he called regulatory complications, but what I suspected was actually his complete inability to understand basic business operations. Dad had sunk another $35,000 into that venture, plus co-signed a lease that would haunt him for years. Next came Brandon's innovative food delivery service, which was essentially just him driving around town with a cooler full of gas station sandwiches. That folded within 6 months when he realized that actual food service required permits, insurance, and health department compliance. The failed clothing boutique followed, Then, the brief stint as a social media consultant that ended when his only client fired him for posting inappropriate content to their business account. Each failure followed the same pattern: grand announcements about Brandon's visionary new venture, followed by Dad's enthusiastic financial backing, followed by increasingly creative excuses about why the business wasn't meeting projections, followed by the inevitable closure and Dad's immediate pivot to the next big idea. Meanwhile, my success was becoming impossible to ignore, even for Dad. By my 4th year at Summit Capital, I'd been promoted to senior investment analyst with a salary that put me in the top 5% of earners in my age bracket. My real estate portfolio had grown to 8 properties across 3 counties, generating enough passive income to cover my living expenses entirely. The difference in our trajectories was becoming comically obvious, even to Dad's most willful delusions. When Brandon called home to announce his latest failure, a food truck that he'd somehow managed to get impounded for operating without proper permits, I was closing on a 12-unit apartment complex that would double my monthly rental income. But recognition from my family remained as elusive as ever. When I mentioned my promotion during a rare family dinner, Dad's response was a distracted, "That's nice, honey," before launching into a detailed analysis of why Brandon's food truck failure was actually market research for his next venture. "Your brother's learning valuable lessons," Dad explained earnestly. "Every entrepreneur has setbacks. Look at all the famous business leaders who failed before they succeeded. Brandon's just paying his dues." I wanted to point out that most successful entrepreneurs used their own money for those learning experiences, not their father's retirement fund. But I'd long since given up trying to inject reality into Dad's Brandon mythology. The most frustrating part was watching Dad's financial situation deteriorate in real time. I knew from Mom's worried comments that he'd taken out a second mortgage to fund Brandon's ventures. His retirement savings had been steadily depleted, and at 58, he was working longer hours than ever just to maintain their standard of living. Meanwhile, I was building the kind of financial security that could have solved all their problems if Dad had been willing to acknowledge that his daughter might actually be the successful child he'd always wanted Brandon to become. Rachel noticed my frustration during one of our mentoring sessions. "Family dynamics are complicated," she said after I'd vented about Dad's latest Brandon bailout. "Sometimes the people who should be proudest of us are the ones who have the hardest time seeing our success." "It's like I'm invisible to him," I admitted. "I could buy and sell Brandon's entire business history with my quarterly bonus, but Dad still talks about him like he's the next Steve Jobs." "That's his loss," Rachel said firmly. "You're building something real, something lasting. Don't let their blindness diminish what you've accomplished." She was right. Of course. I had built something remarkable: a thriving career, a growing real estate empire, and complete financial independence. I was 26 years old and already wealthier than my parents had ever been. But I was also tired of being invisible in my own family. Success felt hollow when the people who should have been celebrating it continued to treat me as an afterthought. I had no idea that feeling was about to become the catalyst for the most explosive confrontation of my life. By my 7th year at Summit Capital, I'd reached a milestone that felt both surreal and inevitable. I could afford to buy something purely for myself, not as an investment, not as a rental property, but simply because I wanted it. The realization hit me one evening as I reviewed my portfolio statements between my salary, bonuses, and rental income. I was generating more money monthly than most people made in a year. That's when I found the house. It was a stunning 3-bedroom beach house in Sarasota, perched on a bluff overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. The property had been on the market for 6 months, overpriced by sellers who didn't understand the local market dynamics. I recognized it immediately as the kind of opportunity that separated smart investors from dreamers, a premium property that could be acquired below market value with the right negotiation strategy. But as I walked through the sun-drenched rooms, watching the afternoon light dance across the hardwood floors, I realized this wasn't about investment returns or rental yields. This was about having something beautiful that belonged entirely to me. The master bedroom had floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water. The kitchen featured top-of-the-line appliances, and the wraparound deck offered unobstructed sunset views that took my breath away. For the first time in my adult life, I wanted something simply because it would make me happy. The negotiations took 3 weeks. The sellers were motivated but stubborn, clinging to their inflated asking price despite clear market evidence that they were $50,000 too high. I let my commercial real estate experience guide the process, presenting comparable sales data and market analysis with the same precision I used for Summit Capital clients. When we finally reached an agreement $60,000 below their original ask, I felt a satisfaction that went beyond mere financial success. I was 29 years old, and I was buying a beach house with money I'd earned through my own intelligence and hard work. No family trust fund, no inheritance, no husband's income, just me, proving that the little girl who wore hand-me-downs could build something magnificent. The closing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in late September. I took the day off and drove down to Sarasota alone, signing papers in a lawyer's office that smelled like leather and old books. When the attorney handed me the keys, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, just staring at them. The metal was warm from my palm, solid and real and mine. I'd planned to keep the purchase quiet, at least initially. The house was my retreat, my sanctuary from the constant pressure of work and the lingering sting of family indifference. For the first few months, I told no one except Rachel, who insisted on driving down for a weekend to properly christen the place with champagne and celebration. "This is what winning looks like," she said, standing on my deck with a glass of Dom Perignon, watching the sun melt into the horizon. "You should be proud of yourself. This isn't just a house, it's proof that you're in control of your own destiny." The house became my refuge. I'd drive down most Friday evenings, arriving around 8:30 to find the space exactly as I'd left it: peaceful, organized, mine. I'd spend Saturday mornings walking the beach, afternoons reading on the deck, evenings cooking elaborate meals for one while watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. It was the first place in my life where I felt completely at peace. No family dynamics to navigate, no work pressure to manage, no one else's expectations to meet. Just me and the sound of waves and the satisfaction of having built something beautiful through my own efforts. But after 6 months of solitary enjoyment, I found myself wanting to share it not as a business investment or a practical decision, but as a symbol of what I'd accomplished. Despite everything, some part of me still craved recognition from the people who'd shaped my early understanding of worth and success. Maybe it was vanity, or maybe it was the stubborn hope that finally having something undeniably impressive might shift the family dynamics that had defined my entire life. Either way, I decided to invite my parents and Brandon down for a weekend in March. "I have something I want to show you all," I told Mom during our weekly phone call. "I'd like you to come visit me in Sarasota next weekend." "Sarasota." Mom sounded confused. "Are you working on a project down there?" "Something like that," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Can you and Dad make it Brandon too, if he's available?" The excitement in Mom's voice was immediate and touching. "Of course, sweetheart. How lovely that you want to spend time with family. We'll drive down Saturday morning." As I prepared for their visit, I found myself experiencing an unfamiliar nervousness. I cleaned the house obsessively, stocked the refrigerator with expensive groceries, even bought fresh flowers for the dining room table. I wanted everything to be perfect, wanted them to see what I'd built and finally understand that their underestimated daughter had become something remarkable. I planned an elaborate dinner for Saturday evening: grilled salmon with herb butter, roasted vegetables from the local farmer's market, a chocolate tart from Sarasota's best bakery. I imagined Dad's expression when he realized this wasn't a rental or a work trip, but my own property. I pictured Mom's pride as she toured the beautifully appointed rooms. I even allowed myself to fantasize about Brandon's grudging respect for what I'd accomplished. Standing on my deck Friday evening, watching the familiar sunset ritual, I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety I hadn't experienced since childhood. Tomorrow, I would finally show my family that Emily Harper, the girl who wore hand-me-downs and rode the bus, had built something extraordinary. I had no idea I was about to discover just how deeply ingrained their perception of me really was. They arrived at 11:15 on Saturday morning, pulling into my circular driveway in Dad's aging Ford pickup truck. I watched from the kitchen window as they climbed out, their faces registering confusion and then something approaching awe as they took in the house's impressive facade. "Emily!" Mom called out, her voice bright with excitement. "This place is absolutely gorgeous. What kind of project are you working on here?" I opened the front door with what I hoped was a casual smile. "Come on in, I'll give you the tour." Brandon whistled low as he stepped into the foyer, his eyes scanning the vaulted ceilings and designer light fixtures. "Jesus, this client must be loaded. What kind of investment advice costs enough to put you up in a place like this?" Dad was characteristically more reserved, but I caught him examining the crown molding with the critical eye of someone who knew quality craftsmanship when he saw it. "Very impressive," he said grudgingly. "Must be some important deal to warrant this kind of accommodation." The misunderstanding was so perfectly predictable that I almost laughed. Of course they assumed I was here on business. The idea that I might own something this magnificent hadn't even occurred to them. "Actually," I said, my heart beginning to race, "this isn't a business trip. This is my house. I bought it 6 months ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Brandon's jaw literally dropped. Dad just stared at me like I'd announced I was an alien. "Your house," Mom whispered. "You bought this." "With my own money," I confirmed, feeling a surge of pride so intense it made me dizzy. "Cash purchase, no mortgage. I closed in September." I led them through each room like a tour guide, watching their expressions shift from disbelief to amazement. The master suite with its ocean views, the gourmet kitchen with professional-grade appliances, the home office where I'd already set up a second workstation, the guest bedrooms that rivaled luxury hotel suites. "The property is 3 acres, I explained as we stepped onto the deck. "Private beach access, deep water dock rights, and the views are unobstructed because the land to the south is protected wetlands." Mom was practically vibrating with excitement. "Sweetheart, this is incredible. I can't believe you own something so beautiful." Even Brandon seemed grudgingly impressed. "How much did this cost?" he asked bluntly. "That's not really your concern," I replied smoothly. "But let's just say it was a significant investment." We spent the afternoon touring Sarasota, grabbing lunch at a waterfront restaurant, and shopping in the upscale downtown district. For a few hours, I basked in their obvious amazement at what I'd accomplished. Mom kept taking pictures of everything, gushing about the house to anyone who would listen. Even Dad seemed to be warming up to the reality of my success. By evening, I was feeling optimistic about the visit. I'd prepared an elaborate dinner, opened a bottle of wine that cost more than Dad made in a day, and arranged everything on the deck so we could watch the sunset while we ate. "This salmon is extraordinary," Mom said, taking another bite. "Everything is perfect." I'm so proud of you." "It really is a beautiful place," Dad admitted, his voice carrying what I thought might be genuine respect. "You've done well for yourself." I was glowing. After 29 years, I was finally getting the recognition I'd craved, finally being seen as successful, accomplished, worthy of respect. Then Dad continued talking. "You know what? Though this house would be absolutely perfect for Brandon and his family for summer vacations." The words hit me like a physical blow. I set down my wine glass carefully, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. What?" Well, think about it," Dad said, warming to his theme. "Brandon's got 2 kids now, and Sarah's been talking about wanting to take them to the beach more often. This place has plenty of room. It's right on the water. And let's be honest, how often are you really going to use it? You're always working." Brandon immediately jumped on the idea. "That's actually a great point. Dad, you're down here, what? Maybe once or twice a month. Meanwhile, Jake and Madison would absolutely love this place. We could bring them down for school breaks, long weekends, really make use of the space. I stared at them both, feeling like the world had tilted sideways. "This is my house," I said slowly. "I bought it for myself." "Of course it's yours," Dad said dismissively. "Nobody's saying it isn't. We're just talking about sharing it with family. Brandon's got kids to think about now. You're single. You've got your career. You don't need all this space just for yourself." "Besides," Brandon added with a grin that made my skin crawl, "what's the point of having a beach house if you're not going to let family enjoy it? Come on. Don't be selfish." The word selfish detonated something inside me. 30 years of accumulated rage, resentment, and pain crystallized into a moment of perfect, terrible clarity. They hadn't learned anything. They hadn't changed, even faced with undeniable proof of my success. They still saw me as less important than Brandon, still believed that my achievements existed primarily to benefit him. "Selfish," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You know what I mean," Brandon said, oblivious to the warning signs. "Family shares with family. It's not like you're using the place to its full potential anyway." Dad nodded enthusiastically. "Brandon's right. This house is wasted on just one person. Think of the memories the kids could make here. Think of how happy you'd be making your brother's family." I looked around the table at their expectant faces, Dad's entitled certainty, Brandon's casual assumption that he deserved access to what I'd built, Mom's nervous silence as she recognized the storm building in my expression. They were still waiting for me to be the good daughter, the accommodating sister, the one who stepped aside so the golden child could have what he wanted. But I was done being that person. "Get out," I said quietly. Dad blinked. "What?" "I said, get out of my house." "Now." The stunned silence that followed my words was broken by Dad's nervous laugh. "Emily, don't be dramatic. We're just talking about family time." "No." I cut him off, standing up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the deck. "We're not talking about family time. We're talking about you doing what you've done my entire life, dismissing my achievements and handing them over to Brandon like he's entitled to them." Brandon's face darkened. "Jesus, it's just a suggestion. You don't have to bite our heads off." "Just a suggestion." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've been here for 8 hours, and already you're planning to take over my house. Do you have any idea what I went through to buy this place?" "We know you work hard." Mom started gently. I whipped around to face her. "Do you really? Because let me paint you a picture of what working hard actually looks like." I began pacing the deck, 30 years of suppressed fury finally finding its voice. While Brandon was partying through high school with his brand new car, I was working at a coffee shop and saving every penny for college. While he was flunking out of Florida State on Dad's dime, I was graduating summa cum laude and working 3 jobs to pay for textbooks. "That's not fair," Dad protested. "Brandon had challenges." "Challenges." I spun to face him. "What challenge is being handed everything on a silver platter? Having Daddy bail him out every time he screwed up, because let me tell you about real challenges." I pulled out my phone and started reading from my notes app, where I'd been tracking Brandon's failures for years. The sports bar that lost $40,000 in 12 months. The gaming lounge that failed because Brandon couldn't be bothered to show up consistently. The food truck that got impounded because he never bothered to get proper permits. Should I continue? Brandon's face was turning red. Those were learning experiences. Learning experiences funded by Dad's retirement money. I shouted, "Do you want to know how much you've cost our father? Because I do. I've been watching him take out loans, drain his savings, mortgage the house all to fund your learning experiences." I pulled out my tablet and opened a spreadsheet I'd been maintaining for years. Call it professional curiosity or morbid fascination. The sports bar, $42,000. The gaming lounge, $28,000. The food truck, $15,000. The clothing boutique, $31,000. Various smaller business loans over the years, approximately $18,000. Grand total, $134,000. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Mom's face had gone white. Dad looked sick. That can't be accurate," Dad stammered. "Oh, but it is," I continued relentlessly. "I'm very good with numbers. Dad, it's my job. And you want to know the really beautiful part. That $134,000 you've thrown at Brandon's failures, it's almost exactly what my beach house cost." Brandon stood up aggressively. "You have no right to track our finances." Your finances?" I laughed harshly. "Brandon, you don't have finances. You have a 40-year-old man living in his parents' basement, draining their retirement fund while his little sister, the one who doesn't matter. Remember, builds actual wealth." "That's enough," Dad said sharply. "You're being cruel." "I'm being honest," I shot back. "For the first time in 30 years, I'm telling this family the truth instead of pretending your golden boy isn't a complete disaster." I turned to Brandon, who was now standing with his fists clenched. "You want to know what's really pathetic? While you were blowing Dad's money on your ridiculous business fantasies, I was building something real. I own 8 rental properties that generate $43,000 in passive income annually. My investment portfolio is worth over $600,000. My salary alone is triple what Dad makes, and my bonuses last year exceeded your lifetime earnings." "Stop it," Mom whispered. But I was beyond stopping. 30 years of being invisible, of being the afterthought, of watching mediocrity be rewarded while excellence was ignored, it all came pouring out. "And you know what the best part is?" I continued, my voice rising. "I did it all myself. No family money, no bailouts, no safety net. Every single dollar I've earned came from my own intelligence and hard work. While Brandon was failing upward on Dad's dime, I was succeeding despite being systematically undervalued by my own family." "You've always been jealous," Brandon snarled, finally finding his voice. "Ever since we were kids, you've resented that I got more attention." "Attention." I whirled on him. "Is that what you call it when Dad spends your college fund on your failed businesses? Is that what you call it when he co-signs loans he can't afford because his 40-year-old son can't manage a lemonade stand?" I pulled up another document on my tablet. "Speaking of college funds, Brandon, did you know Dad set aside $60,000 for your education and $12,000 for mine? Even when we were children, he valued you 5 times more than me. But here's the kicker: I turned my $12,000 into $600,000 through my own investments. You turned your $60,000 into nothing." The silence was deafening. Dad looked like he'd been punched. Mom was crying quietly. Brandon's face had gone from red to purple. "Yeah, you want to use my house for your family vacations?" I continued, my voice now deadly calm. "The house I bought with money I earned through sheer determination to prove I was worth something. Here's my answer: never. Not for a weekend, not for a day, not for an hour." I walked to the sliding door and held it open. "I want all of you out of my house. Now." "Emily, please," Mom tried one more time. "We're family." "No," I said firmly. "Family supports each other. Family celebrates each other's successes. Family doesn't immediately try to take what someone else has earned. You're not my family. You're people who happen to share my DNA." Dad finally found his voice, his face twisted with anger. "You ungrateful little—" "Ungrateful," I cut him off. "What exactly should I be grateful for? The hand-me-downs, the used bus pass, the constant message that I didn't matter as much as my brother. Or maybe I should be grateful that you're only trying to give away my house instead of stealing it outright." I gestured toward the door again. "Get out, all of you, and don't come back." They left in stunned silence, Dad muttering angrily under his breath, Brandon shooting murderous looks over his shoulder, Mom sobbing quietly as she gathered her purse. When their truck disappeared down my driveway, I stood alone on my deck, shaking with adrenaline and righteous fury. The sunset was painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, just like every other night. But everything else had changed forever. For the first time in my life, I had told my family exactly what I thought of them, and it felt like freedom. The house fell silent except for the eternal rhythm of waves against the shore. I stood on my deck for what felt like hours, watching the sun disappear into the Gulf of Mexico, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed almost too beautiful for such an ugly confrontation. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but underneath the physical aftermath of the explosion, something else was emerging, a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in decades. I walked back through my house, seeing it with new eyes. Every room represented a choice I'd made, a goal I'd achieved, a dream I'd turned into reality through my own determination. The granite countertops in the kitchen, the hardwood floors that gleamed in the lamplight, the custom windows that framed perfect ocean views, all of it belonged to me because I'd earned it. For 30 years, I'd carried the weight of their disapproval, their dismissal, their casual cruelty. I'd built my entire life around proving I was worthy of respect, worthy of love, worthy of being seen as an equal to my brother. But tonight, I'd finally realized the truth. Their opinion of my worth had never mattered. It had never been about me at all. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows and the sound of seabirds calling to each other over the waves. For the first time in years, I felt truly rested. I made coffee in my beautiful kitchen, took it out to the deck, and called Rachel. "How did the family visit go?" she asked cheerfully. "I told them to get out and never come back," I said matter-of-factly. There was a pause. "Good for you," she said finally. "What took you so long?" Over the next few weeks, the fallout was predictable. Dad called twice, leaving angry voicemails about family loyalty and disappointing behavior. Mom tried a gentler approach, sending texts about how much she missed me and hoping we could work things out. Brandon, true to form, sent a single message calling me a selfish bitch who would die alone with my money. I deleted them all without responding. The silence that followed was the most peaceful I'd ever experienced. No more obligatory holiday visits where I sat quietly while Brandon's latest failure was reframed as a learning opportunity. No more birthday calls where my achievements were acknowledged with lukewarm praise before the conversation inevitably turned to whatever crisis Brandon needed Dad to solve. No more pretending that dysfunction was normal, that inequality was acceptable, that I should be grateful for scraps of attention. My life simplified beautifully. I threw myself back into work with renewed energy, closed several major deals that impressed even the senior partners, and expanded my real estate portfolio with 2 more properties. Without the constant drain of family drama, I found I had more mental space for creativity, for planning, for actually enjoying the wealth I'd built. 6 months later, I got a call from Mom. Dad had suffered a minor heart attack, stress-related, the doctor said. They were facing significant medical bills, and with his reduced work capacity, money was tight. "I know things have been difficult between us," Mom said carefully, "but I was hoping maybe you could help with some of the expenses." The old me might have felt guilty, might have written a check to prove I was the bigger person. The new me understood exactly what was happening. "Did you ask Brandon to help?" I asked. Mom's silence was answer enough. "Has he offered to contribute anything from his trust fund or his business profits?" "Emily, you know Brandon's situation is complicated. His situation is that he's a 40-year-old man who's never supported himself for a single day of his adult life," I said calmly. "My situation is that I'm a successful businesswoman who earned every dollar in my account by working for it. Dad spent 30 years making it clear that Brandon was the child worth investing in. Now Brandon can return that investment." I hung up gently but firmly. 3 years have passed since that confrontation on my deck. I've heard through distant relatives that Dad eventually recovered, that Brandon briefly tried selling cars before getting fired for poor attendance, that Mom has gone back to work part-time to help with their finances. I feel neither satisfaction nor regret about their struggles, just the peaceful indifference of someone who's finally learned that other people's choices are not her responsibility. My beach house has become everything I dreamed it would be. I host Rachel and her husband for long weekends, throw elegant dinner parties for colleagues and friends, and spend countless solitary evenings on my deck, reading and watching the sunset with a contentment I never knew was possible. Sometimes I think about the little girl who wore her brother's old clothes and dreamed of being seen as valuable. I wish I could tell her that she was already valuable, that their blindness was never a reflection of her worth, that she would someday build something so beautiful it would take her breath away every single day. But mostly, I'm grateful. Grateful for the struggle that taught me self-reliance, grateful for the dismissal that fueled my determination, and most of all, grateful for the moment I finally chose my own peace over their approval. I built this life with my own hands, and no one can take it away from me. That knowledge is worth more than any family reconciliation could ever be. As I sit here now, watching the sun set over my piece of paradise, I know I made the right choice. Sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from people who refuse to see your value. Sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing their game entirely. And sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this from right now? Please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts about family dynamics, standing up for yourself, or any part of this story that resonated with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this revenge story, and feel free to share your own experiences with overcoming family challenges. Your engagement means the world to me.